There is another candidate, Sarah Freeman, but we had no response from her. So we'll begin with Mr. Michael Charney.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Speak right into the mic. Maybe one.
Hey, can you all hear me back there? Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm running because I think we need an experienced educator on the State Board of Education. And I spent 30 years in Ohio's classrooms, and I taught all different kinds of students. Students about to go to elite universities, students with disabilities, and students about to drop out of high school. And for my 4-year project in dropout prevention, Governor Voinovich awarded me the Ohio's Martin Luther King Humanitarian Award. 4 years later, I was awarded the National Teacher of the Year for my work both in the classroom and in organizing parents to have literacy-friendly homes and to be involved in leading school improvement efforts. But my real experience came when I gave, as a social studies teacher, when I gave the Ohio Proficiency Test and the Ohio Graduation Test. And what I learned from my students and from my fellow teachers is these high-stakes standardized tests distorts teaching and learning and denies children a well-rounded education, because what is tested is what is taught. And it takes so much time. In fact, if you all take your eyes and look over there, you'll see that at ATEP, class is being delayed next week because so the students can take the OGT test. And superintendents told me in my listening sessions across District 7 that now 20 to 25 days are taken up with standardized testing. But there's even more about testing. When I went to Jefferson Elementary School to listen to the teachers there, they told me after 25 years, some of the teachers wanted to quit. They really couldn't, because they felt that their classroom was being micromanaged and their students were becoming a test score rather than becoming a place to have deep personal and academic relationships. But my real sad time on the campaign trail was at Lakeside High School, where I met with the teachers and I said, "What a brand new building! Isn't this a great facility and a great library where we were meeting?" And this is what they said to me: "Michael, we have a great library, but we can't afford a librarian." And what I found out is that 6 out of the 7 public school districts in Ashtabula can't afford a librarian because hundreds of thousands of dollars are taken away from their school budgets by online for-profit charter schools, and there's not a real brick-and-mortar school in Ashtabula County. $900,000 for Ashtabula, $500,000 for Jefferson. So when I'm elected, I will shine the light on online for-profit schools, charter schools, and reduce the reliance on high-stakes testing. I'm Michael Charney, and I'm looking forward to being elected to the State Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience with us tonight. My name is Sarah Fowler. I'm your current State Board of Education representative, and it has been a pleasure to bring a unique voice to the State Board of Education as a homeschool graduate, a small business owner for 13 years, and an former instructor of hands-on skills in both the United States and in Mexico. I have had the privilege to serve you on 3 committees. I'm currently the Vice Chair of the Operating Standards Committee, which is reviewing the regulations for all forms of education: public, private, religious, and public charter schools. Home education regulations also come under the purview of the State Board of Education, and I am the only board member that has had the opportunity to have experiences in all of those areas as far as connections with people, connecting with different groups, and bringing a unique perspective to the board. I support parents choosing the best education option for their children. I support local school boards making the decisions for the districts at a community level. At a state level, we need policies that are more broad, that are not pushing unfunded mandates down on local districts. I support that through a variety of ways. During my time on the board, I have voted against a number of resolutions, including the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System and Ohio Principal Evaluation System, OTES and OPES, because I believe teachers should be held accountable to the parents and superintendents and local school boards that are hiring them, not to a state bureaucracy through an untested test. I believe that we need to have local boards of education making decisions about curriculum. The state law specifically says that it is a local school board's authority to vet the curriculum that is used in their schools. But most school board members don't know that locally. And so I had the privilege of writing a resolution last November, which was passed with strong bipartisan support in a vote of 12-3, to place a disclaimer in prominent places on the State Board of Education's website to allow local board members and teachers and parents to go to the website and see very clearly what the law says about curriculum being a local jurisdiction. That's also another reason that I have concerns about the Common Core state standards. I'm concerned that we are not allowing local districts to choose their standard as the state law says, because we have an assessment that was funded with $362 million of federal money to create that is directly aligned to a specific standard. And most districts, we had a third of the districts in the state that did not adopt it until the assessment was coming into the picture. My name is Sarah Fowler. I feel that I can represent you well. I bring a fair, broad, and balanced perspective to the State Board of Education. Please visit my website, electsarahfowler.net.
Thank you. David Spencer.
My name is David Spencer. I'm running for the State Board of Education, District 7, which includes Portage County, Geauga County, Trumbull County, Ashtabula County, part of Lake County, and part of Summit County. And so if there's anyone here who's unable to vote for me, then please go to my website, Spencer for Ohio Schools, and like me on Facebook. I'll take that. There is also literature on a table back in the corner there that I appreciate it if you would take some of that on your way out. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event this evening, as well as ATEC and this fine facility. I'd like to share with you this evening just a brief quote from Cicero, who said, "What greater or better gift can we offer the Republic than to teach and instruct our youth?" And that's what we're all about as we think about education for our kids. And we want to provide the best possible education that we can to help them be a success in the world. And to do that, I'd like to just share with you some of my ABCs as I run for this position on the state board. I would, A, advocate for public schools. If I'm elected to the State Board of Education, advocating for public schools will be a priority for me. Part of my experience, I think, helps me to be able to do that effectively. I have a broad background as a public school teacher and as a 17 years as a public school principal. And during that time, I served on a state level board of directors for the Professional Association for Administrators, as president of our county association for administrators, and have served on community boards and committees as well. Board of directors for an organization in Portage County called Coleman Professional Services, provides mental health and other services for individuals. Building character would be B. I was chagrined to read in the paper today, in just one of our counties in District 7, the number of families impacted by the heroin epidemic has increased over the last 2 years. 2 years ago, the number of families that were broken up, children had to be placed out, was 115, and it is now up to 117. So I would advocate character education programs and implementing those into the schools. C, creating success. I would advocate programs for developing good curriculum, finding quality teachers, and of course, a good education and creating success takes a supportive community. So, my name is David Spencer. I'm running for State Board of Education, and I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you propose to do to make charter schools charter school companies accountable for the public money they receive? Mr. Charney.
First, we must have both transparency and a level playing field, and we must publish how much profit they're making. Now they're hiding behind these guidelines, getting away with that. I think that we also must publicize in every public school district how much money they're losing. I mentioned some of them, but in Conneaut it's $500,000. So I want to make sure we'll have an enraged citizenry that demands that public schools get not only their fair share, but we begin to make sure that we have good charter schools for the original way of new curriculum, and not ones that are great at marketing, great at making profits, and real poor at educating their children, where only 35% of the students graduate. When the taxpayers know those facts, I don't think they'll withstand the level of pressure that all of us can put on both the state board and the lawmakers.
Ms. Fowler.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you. First off, I want to be clear that the public charter schools are public schools. They are funded through the general budget. They do not receive local property tax money. That said, I have planned to bring forward a resolution at our next board meeting in November to suggest that we recommend to the legislature a change in the law which would allow the board sponsors, or the governing authority, to receive a specific amount of training regarding sunshine laws, public records, and the understanding of the duties that they have as a board member. And secondly, to allow the sponsors, which are nonprofit under the law, to withhold funding from the operators of the school if they are not meeting state laws and operating requirements. I think this would go a long ways toward helping address and circumvent the problem that we've been seeing in the papers over the last 6 months.
Mr. Spencer.
I think the problem with the charter schools is that they need to be closely monitored by the State Board of Education. Now, I realize the changes that we may want to advocate need to come from the legislature. However, the State Board does have a voice and can advocate and communicate that to the legislative representatives on the board. However, I would be one vote, and my job would be to reason and try to bring the other colleagues on the board together to try to communicate this to the state legislature. Also, I'd advocate incremental funding for the charter schools based on their performance, and I think that would be very important. Also, the charter schools, nowhere in the literature are they referred to as public schools. The literature refers to them as independently operated, publicly funded schools. And they make that distinction between the charters and the public schools. Thank you.
Thank you. What are your opinions on Common Core standards for the Ohio school systems? Ms. Fowler.
Thank you. As stated in my opening comments, I have some concerns about the Common Core state standards due to the way that they were created and have been implemented, as well as the fact that there are members of the validation committee, the only mathematician on the board, Dr. James Milgram, and the English language arts professor, who created Massachusetts' outstanding standards for English language arts, who refused to sign off on the standards because they said they were not rigorous. We also have Mr. Milgram saying that these math standards were going to put us 2 to 3 years behind every high-achieving country. And I'm concerned that if these are really to be a more rigorous standard, that we should have tested them first. I did testify before the legislature in favor of repealing the Common Core at a state level. I support districts being able to choose whether or not they feel that this is a district or a standard that improves their district, and to be able to choose that at a local level without the state, in essence, mandating it through use of state assessments that are directly tied to the standard. Thank you.
Mr. Spencer.
Well, part of the reason the standards in math and English language arts came about is because all the different states had different standards. And students were coming to colleges and universities, and many of them having to take remedial courses because they didn't happen to take the subject areas in the right sequence, and so there was no uniformity to it. And so this is an attempt to bring about some systematic way of having standards for all our students. Sometimes the criticisms of the standards, people mistake quantity for quality. It was discovered that many places were trying to cover way too much material, being mile wide and 1/8 of an inch deep. And the attempt of the standards is to be rigorous and challenging and to narrow the scope and go deeper into the various subject areas. And so those are some of the concerns regarding the standards. Over 42 states have adopted them.
Mr. Charney.
I think it's important that we have high academic standards so kids won't get a watered-down curriculum. But I have some concerns about these Common Core standards. First, in New York State, only 30% of the students pass the Common Core exams and only 15% of children of color. Now that would mean we should do a lot more with smaller classes, all-day kindergarten, preschool, and personal attention, but I'm worried that this legislature won't want to put the funds into helping these kids. Second, I think that some of the standards for the little kids might not be what we call in education developmentally appropriate. In other words, kindergarten kids can't really handle some of the things they're asked to do. But I'm also worried that with a national test, that multinational corporations will see this as a new market. And a company like Pearson will be making millions and millions of dollars rather than having local-based educators developing these kinds of assessments.
Thank you. Do you believe that charter schools should be held to the same testing standards as public schools? Mr. Spencer.
Yes, I would not object to that at all. But I believe right now the testing needs to be pulled dramatically back in the public schools. If you were to look at the testing schedule, there's 36 weeks in the school year. 29 of those weeks are impacted by testing with one group or another. The greater concern is not only does this induce stress level in many students, but also it robs the students of instructional time. And so we need to take a serious look at this, and one of the problems with the debate on Common Core standards is there's more acrimony than there is analysis. And we need to have the discussion focus on these kinds of things, the testing. Thank you.
Mr. Charney.
Yes, I think there should be a level playing field in all aspects of state regulations for charter schools, including testing. But the problem isn't whether charter school kids take the test. The problem is there's so much testing that it pushes out creative thinking, field trips, and it also pushes out an emphasis on subjects that aren't tested. I was in a elementary school just last week, and the 5th grade teacher told me that the kids don't know any science because they're only being tested in reading and math before they enter 5th grade. Too often then, when we have this high-stakes test, kids become little robots, where all they can do is learn how to take a test, rather than becoming creative thinkers and really reaching their potential. So we could destroy charters and public education with so much testing, but we ought to revisit this whole idea of high-stakes testing, because it really doesn't help kids, doesn't help teachers, and it doesn't help parents.
Ms. Fowler.
Thank you. You know, there's a quote I really like by Jeannie Charney, I forget her last name, but I saw it on Facebook, and it said, if the purpose for learning is to do well on a test, we've lost sight of the real purpose for learning. And I think that we might all agree on that particular issue. That said, Currently, under Ohio law, public charter school students are required to take all state assessments with the exception of dropout recovery schools. And they are required to have state certified teachers. They're required to meet state standards. They're required to use, to meet health and safety standards. Public charter schools are required to meet specific curriculum requirements, not mandated curriculum, but the same as you have in your traditional public schools, in your home education environments, where there are specific course requirements in science, in English language arts, in math, in history, and that's an across-the-board requirement. So, to clarify, I also agree that we need to reevaluate the testing, and I am working with the Department of Education to that end right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do special needs children's programs affect our schools' budgets? Mr. Charney.
Totally. In other words, not only with the federal regulations, but it costs a lot more to give these kids personal attention. You can't, not only if they're going to be in mainstream classes, you need a paraprofessional to help them out, but then if they're not going to be in the mainstream classes, they're going to need sometimes only 5 students in the class, maybe 10 or 15. So, unless teachers are going to work for free, it's going to cost a lot more money to have more teachers, more paraprofessionals, and also more work to create the IEPs, the individual education plans. That's one thing that I think a lot of the public doesn't understand in the last 30 years with the new, federal regulations, that to educate all children, we can't say, forget those special ed kids, we can't spend the money, and that's why I think there's been an increase in school spending over 30 years to help out those children who really need that help.
Ms. Fowler.
Yes, I would agree that there is a definite impact on a school's budget from special needs students. That said, the state budget does include special set-asides for students requiring special needs attention, but the federal government has required through the IDEA law that students must be served until they are 21 going on 22, and so at the present time there's not any choice in the matter. They are included in the public school, they're included in the classroom, and I think that it's very beneficial for many of those students for the care that they're receiving, but it is definitely something that the state budget can help with, and there are some funds that are set aside by the legislature to help districts with that.
Mr. Spencer.
Well, it does affect the budget, and I think it is money well spent. One of the greatest privileges I had as a principal was to have one of my students who is visually impaired win a statewide essay contest in the 8th grade, and to read that essay in Braille before a group of people gathered at the honors banquet. The essay was dealing with how to cope with life's difficult circumstances. And so when we talk about people with disabilities, I think it's commendable that a nation like the United States of America would have a law on its books insisting that every single child who has a disability from age 3 through age 22 receives a free and appropriate public education.
Thank you. What is the role of a state board of education member? Do you believe in advocating for public schools as is the priority? Ms. Fowler.
Yes, well, the State Board of Education has 2 primary roles. It is quasi-legislative, which means that the laws that the legislature passes regarding education come before the board, and we make policy or regulations or select tests or whatever the circumstance may require. When I joined the board, we had one bill that required over 90 things for us to do in 6 months. That was quite intimidating. We also have a quasi-judicial role, which basically is licensure. We perform evaluations on those who are applying for licensure, and we also provide discipline for those who are abusing their licensure for personal gain. And I would say we also have a third role, and that is we can make recommendations to the legislature regarding changes in the law that we expect or would like to see. And I believe that we should advocate for all forms of education that are legal in the state.
Mr. Spencer.
Well, would you repeat the question, please?
What is the role of a state board of education member, and do you believe advocating for public schools is the priority?
I think the role obviously is developing policy and as well as overseeing the Department of Education and issuing licenses, hiring the state superintendent of instruction. Those are among the duties of the State Board of Education and each member on the board. Advocating for public schools is I would say, a major role. It's a function of each board member. However, the board is also charged with overseeing the monitoring of charter schools. And so I'm just wondering, over the last few years, what was happening while the charter schools, we had these various abuses, manipulating data and statistics, unlicensed teachers being brought in from overseas, and other abuses happening in the charter schools. So I think there needs to be closer supervision by the board over the State Department of Education. Thank you.
Mr. Charney.
I thought Ms. Fowler outlined very appropriately the functions of a member of the state board, and Mr. Spencer talked about the need to have oversight on charter schools. But I also have another vision of what an active school board, state school board member would be. My wife served on the State Board of Education for 6 years, and what I learned from her, that what a state board member can and should do is organize the voice of citizens, to put pressure on the legislature, to be able to hear what actually goes on in Ohio's classrooms. And I'll be going throughout District 7 to speak with parents, to have teachers raise their voice, to have students describe the reality of what it means to be in Ohio's classrooms. Because we must push back against the injurious policies around testing, around profiteering, around privatization that have characterized the last 6 or 7 years, 4 years in Columbus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Candidates for State School Board. Thank you. Mr. Mackel.